What's going on, everybody? I am Brett Popish, and this is Defiant. I'm joined here today with a buddy of mine, Dennis Smythe. How you doing, Dennis?
I'm good, Brett. How are you?
Good. Well, hey, I wanted to come on with Dennis because him and I are in a business networking group together, and every time we get together for just our what we call one-to-one meetings to get to kind of know each other's business, we end up taking 2 hours talking about politics.
Indeed.
And for all the listeners out there that are subscribed to this podcast, you know, I always have people on that kind of think the same way as I do, just because it seems like those are usually the guests that want to come on. And Dennis actually has a little bit different viewpoint. I don't want to say too far different, but just a little bit different viewpoint that I feel like you coming on today would give just a difference of opinion, a different point of view, but also kind of maybe push back, challenge me on some things, and I can do the same to you.
Sounds great.
Good deal.
Yeah.
So I think this, I don't know what the hell we'll call this episode. I don't know if we're going to call it the rundown or what the hell we want to talk about. But the other day, for people out there listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, Dennis is in the health insurance industry. And we had a meeting the other day talking about health insurance and, you know, really diving into the overall health insurance, medical environment, the cost, treatments, that sort of thing. I think we can kind of go down a little bit of a road here and just talk about that, because you have a little bit of a background on why insurance is as costly as it is, kind of what changed, maybe going back to like the Obamacare days, things like that.
Yep.
So why don't we start and talk, and I'll just kind of give you a quick story for me, and that might let this flow a little bit. But before Obamacare got kicked in, right, we were with Kaiser, and I was with, we ended up having to go through Kaiser because if you remember, they didn't exclude pre-existing conditions. They either took you or they didn't take you.
Right.
And so back then I still have a pre-existing condition, but back then it was diagnosed incorrectly, but Kaiser ended up taking me. And this was, I want to say, back in early 2009 is when we got this health insurance plan. First year for me and my wife. Now, granted, we were a lot younger.
Right.
I was under 30 years old. We'll put it that way.
Right.
Our health insurance for the both of us was $368 a month. Obamacare gets enacted. I don't remember what year that was, but I don't think it was immediate. It might have been 2010-ish.
It was about 2013 was when it was fully implemented.
Okay. So when Obamacare got fully implemented, our insurance, and granted, you know, just as every other insurance goes, it increases gradually over time, right? So I think by the time that got implemented, or before it got implemented, we were paying like $400, me and my wife, $400 a month.
Right.
It gets implemented. It jumps over $800 a month. It jumped 100%, basically.
Right. Yep.
Now, I got to ask, and this is where I come at more of like a anti-government standpoint. Sure. You know, they bring in Obamacare, and we're kind of going way past here, but they bring in Obamacare thinking or promoting that it's going to be more affordable health care for all.
Correct.
Well, how in the hell did my insurance go up 100% if it's going to be more affordable for all?
Well, it was not marketed properly. It was not... the idea of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is great. The idea is to get people who aren't insured. And when you don't have any underwriting, because Obamacare works exactly like your Kaiser plan did. So it doesn't matter if you're coming in the door and you go to the doctor once a year, you never go to the doctor, or if you have a chronic condition, if you have a pre-existing condition that requires care, requires medication, requires whatever, you pay the same for someone who is the same age, lives in the same zip code, and doesn't smoke or does smoke, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the rating factors: your age, where you live, whether you use tobacco or not. So if you recall, when the law was enacted, if you did not choose to get health insurance, if you did not have it through an employer, or you did not get a plan, there was a penalty when you did your taxes. There was a tax penalty. That was repealed. So people who were healthy, generally younger people, chose not to get insurance. So the idea with any insurance is you have the healthy people pay for the sick people. You have good drivers pay for bad drivers.
Sure.
You have, that's the fundamental insurance model. when you don't qualify for a tax credit, it is not in most cases affordable. But it's not really affordable on a group side either. People leave their jobs, they look at the Cobra, and it's 20, 30, 40% more than an individual plan. Now, granted, there's probably more coverage, lower deductibles, all
Sure.
of the things people want. But yeah, and I tell people this all the time, Brett. Look, if everybody who is involved in your health insurance policy has to make money, right? The doctor group has to make money. The hospital group, the pharmaceutical companies clearly have to make money. Insurance
Pharmaceutical companies print money.
exactly. Insurance companies clearly have to make money. So there's four entities right there, and there's probably more, right? There's the people who make the medical equipment, all of that stuff. So you're at best going to finish fourth, fifth, or sixth in the hierarchy of priorities. The profit motive really has been not great for patient care and costs in this country. That was a really long answer to why is it so fucking expensive.
Right.
Our health system sucks. It's not healthcare. It's sick care, and they have these fantastic therapies, medications. They work, and I get they take a lot of money to develop, but in most cases, it's cost prohibitive.
Right. My thing is, and we've talked about this before, but I always look when the government gets involved with anything, cost tends to go up because you end up with extra administrative costs. Administrative costs really balloon because of extra paperwork and reporting and all this shit that has to get done because of government intervention. And I understand the idea of telling these pharmaceutical companies from a legislative level, hey, you cannot discriminate, if you will, based on pre-existing condition. Because honestly, the moment you're born, many of us have a fucking pre-existing condition, whether it's genetic or not, right? I mean, you're born with a pre-existing condition. So I like the part of that. What I don't like is the fact that the insured now have to pay for the uninsured when you have people voluntarily not wanting to get insured simply because, hey, they're healthy, they're young, they're whatever, or they just want to neglect it and hope that they don't get some catastrophic injury. And the idea behind the collective, and I want to be careful how I say this, but the idea behind this quote unquote socialized medicine, I don't want to call it socialization or socialism, but the idea behind socialized medicine, really does not work all that well. When you look at other countries that have this platform, such as Canada, you have Canadians bitching about their healthcare. I think nobody's going to be happy about their healthcare system. No matter what the fuck you do, in this example, no one's going to be happy about it. But to get government bureaucracy involved, I think that it doesn't solve the problem. It exacerbates the problem by adding additional costs and additional overhead that the insurance companies, and me personally, I have no sympathy for insurance companies or pharmaceutical companies. I just don't. But the reality of it is they have added costs that they have to bring on now because of everything that the government tells them they have to do. And I always look and say there's no government solution for a problem because the reality is government, left, right, middle, makes no difference to me. They're the problem. In many cases, they cause the problem because of unintended consequences that their legislation brings that either they know, which would be intended consequence, or the majority of them are like, oh shit, we didn't think of that.
So I, in most cases, agree with that. What happens, so they're trying to do two things. When you're not, so there's so much money involved in healthcare, and you and I talked about this the other day. When there's when there's lobbying involved, when there is so much money, because there is so much money at stake from a pharmaceutical standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, they pay lobbyists tens of millions of dollars to go to Capitol Hill, and you have competing interests, right? The insurance companies and everybody's got to make money, but we want to insure these people. So when you have that extra layer. That's fundamentally, for me, the problem when you have a government program, especially at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen at the state level. It can happen at the local level, just not on the same scope. Also pair that with, if somebody chooses not to get insured, or insurance is not accessible to them, and they get sick or they get hurt, and it's not, life threatening, they're not going to die as a result of that
Right.
injury, they may choose not to go seek care, right? You get a chest cold, it's bad, it gets worse and worse and worse, but you can't afford to go to the doctor. So now it turns into pneumonia, and your healthcare now becomes the emergency room. So they can't turn you away. You're seeking care at the absolute most expensive avenue to seek that care. Just because I don't have the ability to pay doesn't mean the doctors don't get paid, nurses don't get paid. Everyone still gets paid. Who pays that, right? It now becomes untaxed, or costs that are not, the government still pays, and we still pay for it through our taxes, through surcharges, through all this other stuff. We're all paying for the sick and the uninsured, regardless of whether it's in the legislation or whether it's just as a result of how our system is set up. So, um, the best way to start to manage healthcare costs is to eliminate or severely limit the lobbyist activity, and how the power that health insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, all of those people who have to make money have on Capitol Hill.
I'm glad you brought lobbyists up because this could be a good segue, but let's keep on the health insurance industry for a moment. And this is where I think you and I can completely agree. I look at lobbying as it should be one of the highest crime offenses of our elected representatives. And the reason I say that is, and you and I talked about this the other day, when you accept money, campaign donations, whatever money you accept trips from a lobbyist, you accept, whatever they give you, fancy dinners, cars, vacations, whatever it is you're accepting. Now you're beholden to that lobbyist group, right? You were originally elected to represent the people of whatever state you're representing, right? Whether
Correct,
you're
absolutely.
House, Senate, makes no difference. You are a representative of the people. And when you accept money from an organization to vote a certain way, are you still now representing your constituents?
No.
No,
No, absolutely
you're
not.
representing your own interest to either stay in power or to enrich yourself.
Correct.
Okay. So I said this to you last week, and I think you kind of looked at me like I was crazy, but I think accepting money from a lobbyist should be considered the same as treason in my mind, because you just violated your oath that you took in office to uphold the Constitution as well as represent your constituents. I also think the lobbying groups should be up to that same penalty, because to me, it's no different. We call it lobbying to soften it, but ultimately it's a fucking bribe, is it not?
Absolutely.
It's a bribe.
I mean, it's a quid pro quo. If I give you $100,000, you're my congressman, right? You're my local congressman. I put together a dinner. I write you a check. I do whatever that translates into 6, 7, 8 figures. There's no way I'm going into that transaction, nor are you thinking that there is nothing that I'm going to want from you.
Yeah.
It may not be right at this moment, but there's going to be a time where your phone's going to ring. I'm going to be on the other end of it, and you better do what I want you to do, because I'm going to say, oh, by the way, remember when that happened and you got that big fat campaign contribution? Remember that that Mercedes you're driving? That's a result of my campaign contribution.
Right.
So for anyone to be naive enough to think that I would like to think people run for office and have more altruistic motives. They really do want to represent the people. They really do want to make a difference. And then, one of my favorite movies is Tequila Sunrise, and Mel Gibson and
old school movie.
Raul Julia and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah.
But one of the great lines in that movie is money makes people predictable. So you go in there, you have the best intentions, and the money starts flowing. And what are you going to do? It's incremental. I don't think people all of a sudden turn into whores for money and contributions, but it's incremental.
You mean they don't go to Washington and start filling their safe with gold bars like that one senator?
Yeah. Well, some do, I'm sure.
Right.
Some do.
Right.
And it's, it's a different time though. It's different in a lot of ways. There's so much more accessibility for people to news, to what's going on, and it's in all aspects of life, whether it's politics or sports or, there was a time, and I heard the stories. I've been involved in around Major League Baseball for a really long time, but there were stories. They used to ride trains, right? So they'd go from New York to Chicago on a train, and all kinds of shit was going on, right? Guys were, having affairs and staying out late, drinking, showing up to the game the next day drunk, but it was not written about in the newspaper because there was, the writers wanted to hang out with the players.
Right.
And if they started airing the dirty laundry, the players were not going to talk to them.
It's kind of like Rolling Stone when they cover rock bands. Certain things you just don't talk about.
Exactly. But what happens in the dressing room stays in the dressing room, right?
Right.
But now that doesn't happen. I mean, how many stories do we see on a weekly basis of athletes, doing stupid shit, right?
Mm.
Because they do.
Yeah.
But the point being, there's people learn more quickly about what's going on because you can look at your phone. You can, 24-hour news. It's all over.
If you believe that information on your phone,
you've got to curate where you find where you get your information. If you go down a rabbit hole and you're believing some dude in Iowa sitting in his basement,
some QAnon shit,
right? Then you're gonna because sometimes you want to believe it, right? You want to believe there's some kind of big conspiracy.
It's affirmation, right? It's ideological affirmation, right? You think something's going to happen. You read an article and you're like, "Yep, that confirms it."
Yep.
Never mind the source of it. Never mind who wrote it. Never mind how long ago it was written. I can't tell you how many times I'm scrolling Twitter, now X, and somebody posts a fucking video of something, and I'm like, wait a minute, I saw that like 5 years ago.
Right.
Like, that's not new.
Right.
And then you try to find it and you find, it's an old video, but it's being purported as it's brand new.
Right.
And you see that a lot. We saw that a lot back in 2020 with a lot of the racial divide and some of like the purported hate crimes and stuff that were happening. And I'm not going to get into that, but I'm starting to see a lot of those videos kind of resurface. And I'm just thinking, like, do people not have any kind of fucking wherewithal about them to be like, how old is that? Right. The other hard part though with video and even with news stories and such with AI,
right?
You have no idea what you're seeing or reading is accurate. You remember back in the day when, I don't know if they told you this, but when I was growing up in school, they said, believe half of what you believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. Yeah. And I always thought half of what you see, like how's that even, like, why? I believe that now.
Yeah.
And it's almost, you believe a quarter of what you see now because how things are curated to make them different, even on the news, different camera angles on the news. I saw this one photo and I can't think of his name, Anderson Cooper. He was covering a hurricane in one of the areas in the southeast that got hit by a hurricane. There's a picture behind him of him standing in like a drainage ditch area, but he's saying this whole city's flooded.
Right.
He put himself in that drainage ditch to make it appear on TV that this whole city's underwater.
Right.
Right. And I think what 2020 did, and we're kind of bouncing around, but 2020 on this case really, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes to how phony the quote unquote mainstream media is. Yeah. Mainstream media we always look at as what? ABC, NBC, CBS, and then you got MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News.
Correct.
Right? Yep. We always looked at least for me, prior to 20, I'm like, oh, well, they're the mainstream. I would assume they're vetted. I would assume they have controls.
Right.
And then COVID hits.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all the different stories you hear and see from the different news outlets. And then you start looking and you're like, maybe I should look at this with a little more critical eye. And you just find out just how corrupt that whole system is. But again, going back to the lobbying, they're part of it.
Right.
The lobbyists are all part of it. And I talk to people a lot and they're like, well, we all can complain all we want. Right.
Right.
And they say, well, you complain a lot about what the government does or doesn't do. What's a solution? I have a couple points that if they would enact it, it would clean the shit up pretty quickly. Not entirely. Number one, you outlaw lobbying entirely.
100%.
The pushback I get on that, I was talking to a gentleman that's into local politics here in Westminster, and he was saying, well, if you eliminate lobbying, how are we supposed to run for office? How are we supposed to campaign? How are we supposed to get money to be able to campaign? That's a problem or a question. I'll come back to you on that because you brought up something that I want to explore.
Yeah.
The next thing, and I don't know why the fuck this has never happened before, how do we not have term limits for senators and congressmen? Because the reality of having the senior, the old folks home in Washington,
right?
Let's face facts, right? You got Mitch McConnell shitting his pants on TV.
Correct.
You've got Joe Biden that is, I don't even understand how he's in the position he's in, given the stress that position creates.
Correct.
You've got Dianne Feinstein that effectively died in office. She was like Weekend at Bernie's. They're like propping her up to have her staffers vote for her. How are we okay with this?
Right.
When there should be a passing of the torch? And I look at it and say, not only that, you should have term limits, but you also should have a retirement age.
An age limit. Absolutely.
You got to have an age limit for these people because here's the thing. I get that these people are old, they're seasoned, they have experience.
Right.
But how often have you been in a job or you've been in a store or you've tried to get some sort of service and the most experienced elder person at that company is the least effective because they're stuck in their ways. This is how we've done it. This is the way it's always been, rather than looking at it from a little bit different perspective that a younger person can. Now, when I say younger person, I'm talking 40, 50 years old. I'm not fucking talking 20-year-olds.
Right.
Right. But I'm certainly not talking 80-year-olds.
Right.
And I don't want to come off as being ageist. But there's a reality that would you want any of those people I mentioned flying an airplane that you're on?
No. Do you, let's put it in terms of what we're talking about. Do we want Chuck Grassley and his geriatric friends making policy and laws around AI?
Hell no.
They don't understand it. Look, my dad's 78 years old and he still calls me. And every time we talk, he's asking me questions about his fucking phone. It's like, Dad, I don't know. I used to do that, but I don't know. Right. Google it. Google it.
It was Google.
Right.
Get on the Google machine.
It's just, do we want, to your point, do I want an 80-year-old doctor? No, I want somebody that may have been trained in medicine prior to the 1960s or later than the 1960s. I don't want somebody who graduated from medical school before I was born.
Right.
And I'm not in my 20s.
Yeah.
So,
well, and here's the thing. So, I just mentioned those 3 points, right? You'd have a retirement age, you got term limits. And when I say term limits, I feel like if you term out in as a representative, you then can go campaign as a senator.
Sure.
Right. You could have feasibly a 20-year career between state and local government, between the federal House of Representatives and the Senate. I mean, you could have a 20, 30-year career just in that, even if there was term limits.
Right.
My issue with these people that park their ass in Washington and purport to represent us that don't is the fact that they are so fucking far removed from everyday life. And this is Democrat and Republican.
Absolutely.
They're both part of the problem. But they're so far removed from everyday life that they don't really realize and see, or if they do, it's even more nefarious, but they don't really realize and see what impact the legislation that they're implementing is causing on the everyday American. Nor do they care. And I look at them as they're the drunken sailors spending all the money they can, spending more money than they have,
right?
Obviously.
Right.
And then coming back to us saying, well, you guys need to pay your fair share. No, you need to stop fucking spending money on shit that doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's where I always say, we talked quite a bit on this, but I always say there is no government solution for an everyday problem. In that, the moment you get government involved, they're going to increase the cost. They're going to reduce the service level of it. They're going to water that service down to a point that effectively makes it a commodity because that's all they know how to do.
Right. I don't disagree with it. And quite frankly, the the one government program that I work with more often than anything is Medicare. And, it is always seemingly on the chopping block. But for most people, not everybody, but for most people, Medicare works pretty good because it's been around for a while and people like it because they have access to healthcare. And people, and we may disagree on this. I get a little, my hairs on the back of my neck stand up when people call Medicare an entitlement program because you've paid into Medicare. I've paid into Medicare. Everyone who has worked in this country for 10 or more years has paid into Medicare. So it's not an entitlement program.
Well, I think where the word entitlement comes in is you pay, I pay to Medicare, we pay into Social Security.
Right.
We're all paying into this big fucking pool.
Right.
And for every dollar we put in, we might benefit 10 cents out of that dollar.
Correct. We're paying for the seniors now.
Right.
And we're hoping that there's a workforce and enough young people when we're at retirement age that can fund the program so we can enjoy that program.
Right.
It's not sustainable is the problem.
Well, it's not. It's not sustainable when you have people drawing off of that system, those systems that never paid into it to begin with.
Absolutely. Yep.
No, I'm not talking people that are born handicapped or, I'm not, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking people that come here from other countries, immigrated here, illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them. And all of a sudden, bam, they're on the government tit and getting money basically from what we paid into. That is not a sustainable system.
Right.
And the only solution then is to say, okay, well, we got to raise taxes. We got to raise your threshold on Social Security, on your gross wages. We got to raise all this shit. And that's where the problem comes in. The other problem comes in with Social Security specifically is how many times have they fucking raided the Social Security fund for other projects?
Right.
Here's a fun note. Did you know, most people don't know this, the federal student loan program, what securitizes it?
I have no idea.
Social Security.
I could have guessed, but
Social Security.
I didn't know. Yeah.
How are the two related? They're not related.
No.
But they had to do that back in the late 60s, early 70s. There was this big push to get college more affordable, more kids to go to college, all that shit.
Yep.
And I could do a whole freaking hour-long podcast on that farce. But that's my issue. If our politicians would create a program and allocate specific money for that and say, okay, there should be a law that says we can never take money from that program. We can never divert it somewhere else.
Right.
Like that money's there for a purpose, only to be used for that purpose. I think people like me would say, yeah, no problem with that.
Right.
Because do I think our elderly that have busted their ass their entire life should be taken care of? Yes, I do. But I also think they should have had the means themselves to create their own life to take care of themselves without this fallacy way of thinking of, well, I'll have my Social Security.
Right.
I mean, we're at a point that any young person today, you could ask any young person, they probably would say, I'm not going to get Social Security.
Right.
But we pay into it.
Right.
And at some point, that's going to go bankrupt. This kind of goes into, and I like to say this, there is no Republican solution for a Democrat problem or vice versa.
Oh, I well, yeah. I mean, it always interests me, and it seems interesting that the party that purports itself to be fiscally responsible for the past few Republican administrations have left with a bigger deficit than they entered with. And the Democratic administration has come in and reduced the deficit that the Republicans spent. And whether that's on defense, whether that's on tax cuts, regardless, it doesn't matter what it's on. But they purport themselves, and people continue to believe that Republicans are going to spend our tax dollars responsibly. And at least for the past few administrations, that has not been the case.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And I think it's because they choose to spend things, they're spending money on different things that the other party does not want to spend money on, and vice versa. There's this constant fucking battle of, well, we have our lobbyists that we got to take care of, and you have your lobbyists that you got to take care of. So we're going to have every 48 years this fucking ping pong back and forth of, well, we're going to funnel money over here, funnel money over here. And by the way, the sucker that's the voter They're just going to pay more in taxes. We're going to sit back and kick on our laurels. And again, it's because they're not going back into everyday life, and they're not seeing the ripple effect that it's having on themselves and their family. You know, you got today, I don't know if you saw this, Kevin McCarthy announced he's resigning from,
I did see that.
from the House.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that?
I think that he probably saw that his chances at leadership were eliminated when he was removed as speaker. I think he probably sees that he can make a lot more money, not in Congress, when he goes back to California, and he can be on corporate boards and be an attorney and
Be a lobbyist.
Be a lobbyist, right? They're I don't want to say everybody. I don't, always and never are very rarely true, but it seems that a lot, maybe not when they get there again, you would like to think that their motives are better, but at some point they start looking at the other side going, I can be on that side. I can be on the money side.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got on my resume now that I was a member of Congress, and I would, theoretically have the keys to the castle and be able to turn the right levers to get shit done, right? So they're going to pay me a shit ton of money to do that, and I don't have to answer to voters. I don't have to be ethically sound-ish, right?
That's a stretch, because I would say, are they ethically sound to begin with?
Well, yeah, I mean, so regardless of where you fall politically, if you think, and I'm going off track here a little bit here, if you think a Supreme Court justice can take hundreds of thousands of dollars from a billionaire and not think that there's going to be a favor that they're going to call in at some point when there's a case before the United States Supreme Court, how in the world does anybody not think that? How in the world do you? If I'm that guy, how am I not so embarrassed and mortified that they found out that I don't just resign in shame instead of just double down and saying, fuck you, I can do whatever I want. I'm a Supreme Court justice and I'm here for life. Speaking of term limits.
Well, so I look at the Supreme Court, I can go both ways on that. Okay. But let's talk about that, because you're talking about Clarence Thomas.
I am talking. Yeah.
Now, I would say this. If Clarence Thomas was a liberal judge and that came out, you would have people fucking screaming racism to the tops of the mountains. Okay. And
you probably would.
And I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And so there is this double standard in this country because he is a conservative justice that now that's under a microscope. Do I think he should have done it? No. Is it legal what he did? Unfortunately, it is legal technically.
Right.
Is it ethical? I could argue and say probably not, right? I'm not disagreeing with that. Which brings up another point is, how is it that that no one in the history of this country, 280 some years, whatever that number is, I don't know what that number is right now, never thought that, maybe we should impose some sort of ethics requirements on the positions that hold on this branch of government that holds lifetime positions. Okay. Now, going to age limit, same thing.
Right.
If you're going to have a lifetime position, there should be an age limit on that, because again, going back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
right,
she was like the crypt keeper from Tales from the Crypt because she was so old.
Yep.
Right. Was she good? Did she have all of her faculties about her at some point? Sure. Towards the end, probably not. Right. So that's where you still need that. The reason I could make the argument that you would have the lifetime position or lifetime appointment is because how chaotic would it be for the law of the land to change every 4 years? You would never have a congruent legal society if every 4 years the person in power could just flip that at a whim.
Right.
So that ultimately is the issue. Unless you try to stagger it somehow to where you say, okay, well, you can only serve 15 years.
Right.
Right. I mean, you'd have to use an odd number so it didn't fall on an election cycle.
Right.
But you run that slippery slope of, think about back in FDR days when they tried packing the court, you run that slippery slope of one individual, one executive, the executive branch, the president saying, I'm going to change the law of the land. Like you can't do that.
Well, we've seen that. We saw that. Three Supreme Court justices were appointed by Trump.
But it happened. But here's the thing, though.
Right.
It just so happened that it occurred during his tenure, right? You had Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right, exactly.
So you had a couple of the other ones. And honestly, this is where you say, okay, well, you should have had an age limit, number one.
Right.
Because then she could have been replaced during Obama's tenure.
Sure.
Right. But to sit here and say, well, it didn't go your way because there was 3 appointed during the Trump administration, would you be making that same argument if it happened during the Obama administration?
Well, but I think that historically, regardless of whether the president was a Democrat or Republican, if a Democrat was in the presidency and there was a conservative justice that either resigned, died, well, that was the only 2 ways they're going to leave, right? So
resign or die.
They resign or die. The conventional practice previous to Trump was that they would not appoint, if a conservative justice were to leave, there was a vacancy with a Democratic president, they would not appoint a extremely liberal justice. It would be more ideologically aligned with the person they're replacing. Now, I'm not saying they're going to replace a staunch conservative with a staunch conservative, but they're not going to go replace them with a very left-leaning
right
justice. That changed. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was replaced by someone who did not in any way ideologically agree with her on anything. And you could probably say that in 85% of the cases, they would have ruled differently.
Very opposite.
Right. So that changed. A lot of things changed.
Yeah.
But I would say to the lifetime appointments, when the Constitution was put together, not many people lived into their 80s, not on a regular basis, right? The life expectancy was maybe early 60s.
Yeah. Probably.
So, you appoint somebody to the Supreme Court in their late 40s, they're going to be on there for 15, 18 years. They're not going to be there for 45 years. So,
exactly.
That's changed fundamentally. It's the same thing with Congress. It's the same thing with the Senate. I mean, they live a long time. And why would they? I don't know why you would want to keep doing that job when you're in your 80s, quite frankly. I don't know. It's got to be power. It's got to be money. There's something there that, they all tout how much they love their families, but they sure don't want to spend any time with them. It's the Walmart commercial with Jim Gaffigan. You can call your family or someone you like, right?
That's one way to look at it. Yeah. You love your family. You just don't want to be with them.
Right.
Yeah. What could be a good solution there is you say, okay, there's 9 justices, right? If I'm not mistaken.
9.
So there should be, and really it should be an apolitical position, but you and I both know that's impossible. Right. In the state of the country, honestly, in any walk of life, that's really impossible to do, to make it apolitical.
Right.
But the Supreme Court's job is to simply interpret the Constitution from a legal standpoint.
Correct.
Now, I say interpret because a conservative and a liberal or conservative and Democrat are going to have different interpretations based on their ideology, where they grew up, how they grew up, their life experiences, all that sort of shit. Mm-hmm. But to go to your point, and I don't necessarily disagree, but there should be 4 and 4 and a toss-up of 1, right? Yeah. And ultimately, if you did that, okay, they'd get nothing done. But a government that gets nothing done is actually not a bad government.
Right. Right. But if you do, if as a judge, your charge is to interpret the law, right? It would literally be, I don't remember if you mentioned it. I'm a college umpire, right? It doesn't matter who's playing, right? It absolutely does not matter.
Right.
I cannot go out there with any biases. So if I go work a game and I'm on the field at my alma mater, I don't go out there wearing the colors of the school I went to. And that I do work where I graduated from college. I work those games and I don't care. They're all just a bunch of dudes wearing tight pants trying to hit a baseball or field a baseball. I don't care. So
you make that sound very erotic.
I know. But that's the reality of it, right? If I walked out there with any agenda about how I would like that game to end up, I would have no integrity. Right. And so we all use the same rule book from, University of Hawaii all the way to wherever the easternmost NCAA college baseball team is, we all use the same rule book. Now, are there different interpretations? You mentioned it earlier, perspective, right? I may see a play one way. One of my crewmates may see it a different way. And I'll guarantee you that whoever the call goes against, if it's close, is going to see it a different way. But we're all working from the same book, and we can't just make our own rules. Or I personally think, today I'm kind of tired. So, I don't really feel like a long game. So, 2 strikes, you're out, right? I mean, I just don't get to make my own interpretation. So I guess that's my point. There seems to be a huge disparity. And don't get me wrong, I get that all of the legal writings and the legal precedents in this country are much more complex and require more critical thinking than a set of baseball rules. But it's interesting how judges on the same body can differ so widely in their interpretation of the law.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't have anything to do with the law. It has a lot to do with, as you said, their background, their personal ideology, and the what's that legal society, the Federalist Society? We need to get rid of them too. The Supreme Court lobbyists. So.
Yeah, here's the deal, man. All lobbyists, it all needs to be banned. It all needs to be outlawed. And I know some people are like, "Oh yeah, it never can happen." Well, it can't fucking happen if we're all just sitting here saying, "Well, that's the way it is."
Right.
But the reality of it is, these people are put in office. We're the ones that elect them to office to represent us. And then the people that we elect to office to represent us then are supposed to make all these other appointments. Because we talk about Supreme Court, but how many other federal appointees do we have on the bureaucracy side that have more of an impact on our everyday life than the people that were elected? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People want to give Donald Trump a lot of shit. And you mentioned, he shouldn't have had the ability to nominate 3. I look at that and say, well, that was piss poor management by the prior administration to not press a Ruth Bader Ginsburg to say, hey, it's time for you to retire. Right. We need you to retire to do this. Now, do I think that that's appropriate to kick somebody out of office? Not necessarily, but when you're long in the tooth,
right,
it's time to go.
I don't have any problem fundamentally with the fact that there were 3 Supreme Court openings. I have a problem with the fact that going against norms to appoint justices that were ideologically opposite of the person they were replacing.
The problem with that is, and I don't disagree, but the problem is if that would have happened during Obama's tenure, it would have done the same thing, just on the opposite end. Especially,
I don't know. Now, would they have replaced a conservative with someone who was left leaning? That is, I think, without question, we can assume that would have happened. However, I don't think it would have been somebody who was. You're not going to get an Amy Coney Bryant equivalent. Yeah, you're not going to get her equivalent on the left when a conservative justice retired.
See, I don't think so. I think that the polarization of our political system has happened for a long time. This is not something that just happened in 2016 to current. Yeah. I will say that if that happened during the Biden administration, it would have been as far left of a judge as possible.
You've changed the precedent, right?
Well, there's a lot of precedents that's been changed over the last, call it 8 years.
Oh yeah,
but even more so over the last 4 years that has put us in a dangerous predicament. Which honestly, let's go to this next topic. Why in the world has Joe Biden not been impeached yet? I got to dig into this because
for what?
For taking money from foreign governments. They've got documentation. They have published it. There's documentation on bank records. There's messages through WhatsApp from Hunter Biden to dignitaries in China referencing his dad, saying, hey, I'm here with my dad. Why haven't you fulfilled your commitment? There's all this shit. And if Donald Trump Jr. would have done a quarter of the shit Hunter Biden has done, they would have had a probe so far up Donald Trump's ass, he would have been shining fucking light out of his eyeballs. And the reality of it is there's this massive double standard. You had Donald Trump for 4 years, and we got to talk about this for 4 years. And I'm not a Trump apologist, because don't get me wrong, he was a his 4 years was a shit show, mainly created by him.
Sure.
But the Russia collusion hoax, a complete fabrication from Hillary Clinton. That's been proven through the Steele dossier. Nothing's happened. Talk about election interference, which led to how many impeachments? 2, because that stepped down into these other impeachments. He made a phone call with Zelensky. Was there a quid pro quo on the phone call? Quite possibly that never came into anything. But then look what's happening in Ukraine right now with the Biden administration funneling fucking money over there like it's going out of style. You don't think there's quid pro quo going on with that and somebody's getting enriched by that? And yet you got these bank records with Biden, his son, his family getting hundreds of millions of, I shouldn't say hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars funneled through them. Money going into Joe Biden's banks that they have verified, and yet mum's the word.
Where is this? What's your source?
Well, James Comer has put out a lot. So he's in charge. I don't know what his position is, but he's in charge of that investigation. All I'm saying is if you had this on Trump, it would be, it's the end of the republic. We've got to get this guy out of here. He would have been impeached already.
So I don't, from what I've seen from James Comer, he's a Republican congressman from Texas, I think. That is all, in my mind, retribution for Trump being impeached twice.
What I'm getting at though, if the information is there, regardless of the retribution, because we both agree, we've hit a point,
right, that
the retribution is going to go on and on.
Yeah. So let me just say this. I think, clearly I think I'm saying it. If there were credible, prosecutable evidence, that would happen, because that's what you're seeing with Trump now and the federal indictments. The federal government, I will tell you, the federal government does not indict people as a fishing expedition. So if that is indeed true, Brett, then that should come out and there should be consequences for it. That's not how our system of government is designed to work, to trade favors with foreign governments.
Well, let me give you an example. Joe Biden, flat out in an interview before he went senile, is talking about, this is before he was even president. And it was after he was VP. He was kind of in no man's land. He wasn't serving anything. He wasn't back as a senator.
Right.
He was doing an interview. You can look this up, find it anywhere, where he's talking about how during his time as vice president, he went over to Ukraine and pressured the president of Ukraine to fire Viktor Shokin, who was the special prosecutor that was looking into corruption in the Burisma. And if he didn't fire him, they weren't going to give Ukraine whatever millions of dollars worth of loan guarantees they were going to give him or whatever. How's that not a fucking quid pro quo? Okay.
It is.
Completely.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at here, and I'm not trying to nail you to the wall, but what I'm getting at here is, in my mind, the reason that impeachment is not moving forward at a faster pace is because if that can of worms gets opened, that you have elected officials funneling money through their family to do favors for foreign countries. How many other people fall for that?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? I mean, really.
Who falls? There's a lot of people, I think, in Washington that would go down with that. And I'm not talking just D's. I'm talking D's and R's.
No, well, absolutely. That's when things don't get pursued, because too many people in power. It'll shine a light on a lot of corruption that's happening across the board at all levels. That's probably the same reason no one's really digging into what the Saudis got in exchange for $2 billion that they handed to Jared Kushner. So,
I agree.
there's I'm not a huge fan of the whataboutism, but With regard to government corruption at the highest levels, I think we can all agree that it happens on both sides and it's rampant. And that's why there comes a point where it just becomes so much where it's like, fuck, dude, all you had to do was go away, man. And we would have just said, you know what, whatever. But you had to keep pushing. And now we can't just let you keep doing this. Right. I mean, I feel like that's where we are with Trump, right? Why doesn't he just go away? Right. If he's got all this money and he's got all these people love him, why does he need to?
Because he can't. And I'll tell you why he can't.
Well, because he wants to shield himself from prosecution as president.
No, it's not that. When you come out as hard as you do against the opposition, and then things transpire the way they did. If he just tucked tail and said, all right, I'm just going to kind of go off into the sunset and I'm going to reinvest in real estate and build my company, do whatever. Everything that you did leading up to that is bullshit.
Yeah, that's true.
And people wonder why, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but people wonder why Donald Trump actually rose to the level he did. I'll tell you why. And this is what a lot of people are missing. People like me, for example, and I'm not a Trump apologist by any means.
Sure.
There's a lot of issues I have. But people like me are sick and tired of the status quo, John McCain, Mitt Romney, fucking Joe Biden politician. Mm-hmm. Telling you what you want to hear, stabbing you in the back on the back end. And hey, while we're doing it, we're going to still fleece more money from you. We're going to extort more money from you out of your paycheck. So they looked at Donald Trump as he's different. He's not a politician. He is somebody that, can we trust him? He's more trustworthy in 16.
Sure.
Than any of the other ones.
Right.
Because they're part of the machine. He's not.
Right.
Okay. Where Donald Trump ultimately fucking failed. And I think anybody in his position going into that office without the experience would have done the same thing.
Sure.
He had no real clue what he was walking into. He had no real clue how deep the corruption went and how deep the deep state actually is, right? The bureaucratic state,
right? That
he can't simply go in and change.
Right.
The last president to try to do that took a couple bullets to the head in JFK.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so people always say, at what point was there a coup in this country? Did the coup happen on election night of 2020? I don't think so. I think the coup happened in the 1960s when JFK was assassinated, because I think the intelligence industrial complex had a little something to say about what JFK was trying to do. And the sad thing on that, while we're on that topic, is this is where the political parties have gotten so off their rails, because I firmly believe if JFK was alive today, he would be considered a conservative, a far-right conservative. Absolutely. Because a lot of the shit that he was trying to do is what some of the MAGA movement, if you will, and I hate that fucking term, by the way, but it's a lot of the same stuff.
Right.
When you go back and you look at that. But to look at what happened with Trump, he was the guy saying, I'm going to change it. 2016 comes in, he gets elected. We have 4 years of election deniers from everybody on the left talking about they should decertify the Electoral College. We need to eliminate the Electoral College. We need to, Trump is a Putin puppet, like all this shit that was okay to do back in 16. But 2020, if you say that, you're going to jail.
Right. Double
standard. But he goes in there claiming he's going to drain the swamp. What'd he do?
Build it up.
He didn't do anything. Well, he didn't do anything from that perspective.
Right.
Right. And was it because he couldn't, or was it because he just didn't understand how deep that went?
Probably a little of both.
I think a little of both. Fast forward to 2020. Now, you and I will disagree on 2020 all day long.
Sure.
But to think that a guy that campaigned from his basement, that has a history of being a racist.
He's an old guy. I mean, they're all racist.
Here's the deal. They come from a different time. It doesn't excuse it.
No, absolutely. I agree. 100%.
It does not excuse it. And the fact of the matter is, the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, I got to be totally fucking honest here. You had how many candidates better than Joe Biden in that initial primary in 2019. You had 2 women of color, Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You had Pete Buttigieg, who he's in over his skis, no matter what. We all can agree with that. How many other people were in that Democratic primary? And yet you picked the old crusty Muppet white guy.
Yeah.
That's got the worst history of berating his constituents, talking down to his people, saying the most racist shit ever on national TV. And yet that's overlooked because, God damn it, we hate the guy that looks like he's orange.
Yeah.
Now, you get my point.
I do. And I would ask the same thing. You have viable candidates. Now, let me just back up, right? I totally understand and I agree 100% that that was the appeal of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the appeal of the guy who's not part of the system, right? The businessman coming in to, I'm going to run it like a business. So, first of all, government can't be run like a business because
it's a nonprofit.
It can't turn a profit, right? Let's go to the fire department and say, hey, what's your balance sheet look like, right? I mean, they're going to be operating in the red, right? Police department, all of them, right? They're not designed to turn a profit, number one. But you have someone who has no experience at any level of elected office, and yet we're going to put him in the highest office. It would be...
It's a popularity contest.
Right. So do I want to go in and, it's like the old, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn, right? I mean, look, I don't know anything about selling a house, but, I have some ideas. I think I'd be pretty good at it. I'm going to take less money, but I'm going to totally fuck up your whole transaction, but you won't have to pay me as much, kind of thing.
Have you been in a lot of real estate transactions?
That's what I'm saying, right?
Because that happens a lot.
Well, look, that's the thing, right? It's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I have some good ideas. And the system as it is now is not great, depending on who you talk to.
Right.
Hey, I'm not a doctor, but, stay at a Holiday Inn Express, right? So I have some ideas about heart surgery. That's what we did that's what happens when you hire people who don't have any government experience. Now, do they need 50 years of government experience? Probably not. But again, our elected officials are the ones where we think zero experience is a plus in some cases. But I would ask the same question with you. You look at the state. I think tonight is the 4 of them now.
I don't even know why they're debating. I'll be totally honest with you.
I mean, I'm not a fan really of anybody, and certainly of that group. I would think Nikki Haley is probably the most qualified and the least offensive. I think Ron DeSantis is Trump Jr. He's trying to out Trump, and it's.
I would say that's more Vivek.
Yeah, no,
I think Vivek is more trying to out Trump.
Oh, well, yeah, but he's
or to like the kid Trump, and
yeah, he's the same thing though, right? You're going to put a guy in there who's all talk and no action. Yeah, he's been successful in business, but that's not how government works. He'd be in the same boat.
The Republican field cracks me up because when you look at the polling, people say, well, why isn't Trump debating? There's no reason there's no reason for him to.
Right.
Okay. And you brought up the indictments a minute ago. Yeah, he's got 93 counts against him.
Yeah. No.
The reality of it is they're bullshit, but the government's not going to go 0 for 93. Okay.
No.
Now, will they might score, 5 of those? Maybe. I think the majority of them they're going to lose on because I do think it is a fishing expedition personally. But when you look at the debates, I sit here and say, you guys are debating to be the number 2. That's all it is.
Well, let me, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but let me ask you this. So Republicans historically have had that, we're the tough, we're the part, the Democrats are a bunch of pussies and we're here, we back the military, we're law and order, we kick ass, take names, fuck people up, right? None of those fuckers on stage tonight will stand up to Donald Trump. And yet they're asking people to vote for them to stand up to the world's worst.
Well, so let me ask you this. What exactly would they stand up to him for? Chris Christie tries, but I mean, Chris Christie. Chris Christie, just back off, go back to your McDonald's drive-thru and just order your fucking burgers.
Right.
Okay. That guy hasn't met a refrigerator that he hasn't liked.
Exactly.
That's probably mean to me to say, but the reality is he wore out his welcome when he was the governor of New Jersey. He's corrupt as shit.
Yep.
I don't think that's a secret, right? You're unlikable at this point in time.
Correct.
Take you out. Vivek Ramaswamy. Do I like what he says? Yes. But it's a very populist headline, catchphrase. I'm going to say this because it's popular.
Right.
He's young. He's vibrant. He's a type of guy we need. He's Obama-esque.
Sure.
But the reality is, and this is the sad, harsh truth of it, he will never get elected. And the reason he won't get elected is no one's going to elect him because of his name. And sadly, this is very fucking sad, his skin color.
Correct.
Now, you look at Nikki Haley and you look at Ron DeSantis.
Well, that's why Nikki Haley changed her name.
Yes.
For all of those reasons.
Yes. And that is a sad truth in this country.
Absolutely.
It's fucking sad that somebody that has that type of name, because do I like what he says? Yes.
Right.
Will he be effective? That's unknown because he's never done it before at any level.
Right.
Okay. You look at his business acumen, you got some questions on that too.
Right. Some
major questions on that. You look at the two people that have experience that could potentially, if Trump wasn't in the mix, it would be between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. Let's just say that.
Yes.
Okay. Ron DeSantis, with what he did in Florida with COVID, flat out puts him heads and tails above Nikki Haley. Because what Nikki Haley to me is a female Dick Cheney. She is a warmonger. Mm-hmm. She's on record of saying that she wants to wipe the map clear of Hamas, but ultimately she's saying Palestine. I cannot support somebody that just wants to indiscriminately blow shit up just simply to save face. Right. To me, so you look and say, okay, Ron DeSantis should be the guy, but he's not. At the governor level, he's got it. He has it whipped. At the federal level, he's not moving the needle.
This bottle of water has more charisma than Ron DeSantis. That dude's well educated. He was an officer in the Navy. The fact that he is so out of his depth when people ask questions and need a substantive answer, he can't do it because he hasn't had to do it.
Well, because he's trying to be a politician. He's trying to give an answer that satisfies the bulk of the population. Whereas to go to Donald Trump, he gives an answer that he doesn't give a shit.
Right.
Whether you like it or not, this is my answer. And that ultimately is why he resonates with so many people. The problem I have with a lot of the Trump movement is they have fucking blinders on and they're like, well, Trump can't do no wrong. I'm sorry. Wasn't it Trump that paved the way for the emergency use authorization for the vaccines? Yes. Now, Trump didn't mandate it like the Biden administration did. He didn't do all the bullshit, all the bullshit they did. But did he close the country down? Yes.
Yeah.
And my thing with Trump is when pressed on these questions, why not just fucking answer and say, yeah, I was given wrong advice, or the advice I was given, it made sense at the time. Looking back, hindsight being what it is, I made the wrong choice. He can never do that, but neither can any other politician.
Well, I'm just glad we all didn't shoot ourselves up with Clorox bleach.
He didn't even say that.
He said something like that.
No, he did not. That's the sound bites.
I'm sorry. He wanted us to all take a horse tranquilizer.
No, he was talking about ivermectin, which actually happens to be one of the foremost leading therapeutic drugs in the world, won a Nobel Peace Prize as one of the world's most essential medicines. And now, time out, as the information's coming out now, is proven to have effectiveness against COVID.
Okay, well, I can tell you that I have had every COVID vaccine and I have not gotten COVID. So, I haven't had any COVID vaccine and I've been just fine the one time I had COVID. Yeah, I mean, it's not just because you got vaccinated doesn't mean you're not going to get it. And just because you didn't get vaccinated doesn't mean you're not going to get it or it's going to be serious. It's just, I get a flu shot every year. There are people who don't get flu shots. I
know.
have not gotten the flu. But I understand that if I do get the flu, I'm not going to immediately throw my hands up and say, oh, that was all bullshit. And those doctors and scientists don't know what they're talking about.
How often have you had polio?
Well, I've had no polio.
How often have you had measles, mumps, or rubella?
I had mumps when I was a kid.
Before vaccination?
Before vaccination.
Okay. My point is, this COVID vaccine, now I'll go down a rabbit hole on this one.
Sure.
Is not a vaccine. It is not. Unequivocally, it is not. The mRNA technology had never once been used up until this point. And the reason it had not been used is because they tried to create a H1N1 vaccine back in 2009 under the mRNA platform. It would not work. Every time these pharmaceutical companies had gone to the FDA for approval, they could never pass animal trials with the mRNA technology because they'd inject the animal for whatever vaccine they were trying, vaccine, right. Air quotes for those on audio. They introduced a live virus to the animal would die. And so up until 2020, they said it will not work. 2020 comes along, it's an emergency designated by the Trump administration. That's where I come out with this.
Right.
And they eliminate animal trials. They actually eliminate the control group in the vaccine study because they ended up giving everybody in the vaccine study the vaccine, even the people that are supposed to have placebo. So they eliminated the control group. How do you know if it works when you eliminate the control group? Then they fudged the number saying, well, it's 95% effective or whatever that fucking number was. The way they did that was total bullshit. And I don't know the specifics on how they did this, but basically it was like, okay, you give it to two people, one person gets the placebo, two people get the vaccine, the one person that gets the placebo dies, and they say, well, it's 100% effective because the other two people didn't die. That is not 100% effective.
Right.
95%, whatever. You get my point on that.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
And so I have major issues around that. But again, that goes to where Trump honestly was in over, I used this term a minute ago, he was in over his skis because he did not know who to trust. Right. He did not know who was on, I don't want to say on his side, because his side should be the side of the American people. There was a lot of unknown. Everybody was working off of the data they had because nobody knew what was what.
Right.
Except Bill Gates, apparently. But you get my point.
I do.
So for them to make all these rules, and that's where you go back to DeSantis. Him and his attorney general in Florida were one of the only states that I know of that were basically saying, you guys got to hold up. Like, if you want to take it, fine. We will not mandate it in this state. There's not enough data to know what's what. And the reality of it is a true vaccine, a legitimate vaccine would have taken 5 to 6 years to properly vet. They magically come up with this concoction in fucking 9 months. But leading up to the election, you have every Democrat lawmaker saying, we will never take that vaccine. Donald Trump created it. Who knows what's in it? Who knows how many people it'll kill? All of a sudden, the Saturday after the election, when the AP announces the thing goes to Biden, the very next day, Pfizer announces we have a vaccine. And then all of a sudden, all those same people that, we won't take it, now we're on board. This is the hypocrisy. This goes back to my statement earlier, that you cannot have a Democrat solution, in this case, a vaccine, for a Republican problem, i.e. COVID.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I do, I think the technology progresses. I think that necessity drives innovation, right? When you have to figure it out, sometimes it gets accelerated. But I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a chemist. I got a degree in speech communication because I didn't have to take any math, right? Like, I don't know.
Right.
But, I try and, keep an open mind and, I'm not someone that wants to have mandates or have 100% rules that tell people what they have to do all the time.
Right.
And I think, this is a great example, right, Brett? I mean, from a lot of big things, probably the people we vote for different people. But, I think fundamentally when you sit down with somebody and you don't attach to them, oh, he's an asshole because he doesn't he doesn't believe the exact same way I do.
Right.
When we start doing that, that's when we turn into a country divided. And when we then start labeling people and calling them names when we don't know anything about them. I mean, it sometimes doesn't take very long to learn people aren't people we would want to spend time with or maybe do business with. But just because we think differently or vote for different people, that's what makes this country great, right?
It is.
And I can tell you, we can sit here and broadcast over the internet, audio, video, have different views. And there's not going to be somebody waiting saying, "Oh, well, you said this, so we're taking you off for questioning." Are you whatever? And I think when we can get back to that a little bit and not have to think everybody, we don't need to be homogenous, right? We don't all need to think the same way. We don't need to tell other people how to think or what to do or how to live.
I think what we need to do though is bring up points like we're bringing up for people to think, but understand too. And I did a solo episode on this a little while ago, about a month or so ago. We can't be so locked in on our affiliation with political party that we're going to vote Democrat no matter who, or vote Republican.
Freudian slip there.
Yeah. We're going to vote Democrat or vote Republican no matter who it is, just because we can't let the other guy in office.
Right.
And this goes back to the whole term limit thing. And people say, well, you do have term limits because you can vote the other person out. Well, not really, because if you're a conservative, and you don't align at all with the guy on the Democrat side, but you don't like the incumbent that's happened to be a Republican, are you really going to vote for that Democrat? Probably not.
Right.
And the only way to get the incumbent out is to primary their ass out. The only way to primary them out is for their own party to say, we don't want you, and we're going to prop up somebody that's going to take your position. That's where the issue comes in. But the other problem is, far too often in this country, and this could be in other countries too. I don't know other countries' politics, and we're already over an hour. I mean, I don't want to even get into the Israeli thing because we talked about that.
Right.
You and I actually agree on that.
We do. Yeah.
But the reality of it is we can't look and say, we're going to just blindly follow this one political party just because from the headline, the top end headline, they align along more of what I believe. You got to be voting on substance, not just the fucking color of their tie.
Well, when you do what you just said, when you just vote ideology or single issue, you have what's happened to the Republican Party in Colorado.
Yeah.
You have, they don't like a moderate Republican, so they primary him with a hard right Republican who wins, right? Because people like what they say, and then they have no shot in the general. And then there's a Democrat. So what's better, a moderate Republican or a Democrat? If you're like a red meat, I'm tried, true blue Republican. You've got to look at people and how they vote and what they do. And the reality of it is, the people we elect their job is to go to Washington and get things done. And to get things done, you have to compromise. And sometimes you have to, if everyone walks out and they're all kind of pissed off, that's probably a good deal, right?
It's probably a good deal for the everyday American. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if one side isn't, doing backflips, it's probably a good deal. I can't remember the last time I, voted for a Republican, but that's because I can't remember who I voted for the last 20 years. But I know that, it was probably I don't know, maybe George Bush Sr., maybe. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. It's become so ideological, and the issues that are important to me don't align with a lot of what Republicans represent. So that's why I don't vote for them. And that doesn't mean they're not good people. That doesn't mean that they're not going there and being honest with and representing their constituents. But, there's just some things I have some different views than that.
It's going to be scary going into 2024. So people always ask me, they know I'm kind of political and outspoken. They're like, what do you think what's going to happen from here now, the election? I'm like, fucking chaos. whatever you can imagine, just plan on it. If we have a fucking purported alien invasion, don't be surprised about it.
Yep.
Will we see it? No. Will we be told about it? Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I say that jokingly, sort of. But it's going to be utter chaos. But what's going to even be worse, and this is the frightening thing, no matter who wins in 2024, half the country's not going to believe it.
Right.
You can have half the country say the election's rigged, it was stolen, didn't happen. What I don't understand is where we go from there. When nobody will, or when you got half the country saying the system is broken and does not work, and you could argue and say they're right in that, whichever side says that,
right?
Because the system is broken. You know, our politicians have fucked it up so bad over the course of time because they've been more focused on enriching themselves than doing what is ethically and morally correct.
Right.
So where do we go in 2024 and beyond? If half the country doesn't buy it, that's a dangerous proposition.
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, it's the institutions that people trusted for generations have been devalued and eroded to the point that we don't believe them. We don't, because we want to hear what we want to hear. We want our point of view represented. We want people to listen to us, and that's fine. That you're more than welcome to voice your opinion, but there are, there needs to be transparency in our elections. There needs to be trust that whoever, we believe that whoever wins the presidential election, we can have that peaceful transfer of power. We talk about all these ideals that the United States has been founded on. And I'm always reminded of, there was a show on HBO called The Newsroom. And like one of the opening scenes, right? It's Jeff Daniels and this gal stands up and says, well, why don't you tell us why America's number one? And
I love that scene.
Right. It's like, our life expectancy is 10th among industrialized by a lot, 8 years. Our life expectancy, our infant mortality rate is not even close to the top. We have so many things that we are not even in the top 10. And yet we purport ourselves to be this American exceptionalism. And there are exceptional things about this country and in this country, but we need to fight to get back to where we can say that and it be true.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think there's a lot of work to be done. I don't think you and I are going to solve the fucking world's problems.
No, but the conversation helps.
But I'll tell you what, this conversation needs to be happening at bars, at restaurants, in living rooms. Yeah. This idea that, well, hey, we can't talk politics around family because we don't want to offend, our aunts, our uncles, our parents. No, you know what? Here's the deal. We should all be able to have these conversations like this without getting personal and berating somebody and basically freaking out on somebody because, well, you don't believe like I do. Like, we all have different experiences. We all have a different way of thinking and coming at it.
Right.
And I think that overall, my thought process is overall, the majority of people think a smaller government in general would be a good thing.
Sure.
Right? Now, where do we cut? That's where the debate comes in.
Sure. Well, start with defense. We can talk about that another time.
Absolutely. Do I think the majority of people, especially now with people hurting economically, would be in favor of reducing taxes across the board? Right. Absolutely. Sure. How you do that, that's where the debate comes in. Right? But, and we're running a little long here, but I want to make one more point on that because I just brought up taxes. They fucking always want to institute stimulus. The CARES Act during the Trump administration, July of 2020. I was adamantly against that.
Right.
Because, and it obviously exploded. I think there was 2 more stimuluses under Biden in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. But I've always sat back and thought, I'm like, instead of the government printing money, and when I say printing, they don't literally print it. It's just added to a fucking balance sheet. But you get my point, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Instead of the government printing money to give to you to then tax you back on it.
Right.
Why wouldn't they say, hey, as a stimulus, we're going to suspend the federal income tax for X amount of time, a month, 2 months. I'm not saying forever.
Right.
But think about how much more money would come back into people's pockets without inflating the currency and creating the issue we had. Right? But instead, they're like, oh, no, we want to give money to people that we're then going to take back. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, there's so many moving pieces and there's so much corruption with that. I mean, think about all the programs that got fraudulently, I don't even know how I want to say this. The fraud committed with a lot of those COVID programs was obscene.
Absolutely.
Obscene. Like, I know people that took PPP loans that are sole proprietors and it's just them. Right? Like you didn't need to meet payroll.
Right.
Right. You just thought, hey, it's free money.
Right. It was.
Politicians taking fucking PPP loans. Like, as a politician, your fucking paycheck is guaranteed. And I could argue it should not be guaranteed.
Right.
Like when you have a government shutdown, let's talk that for a moment. When there's a government shutdown, every politician in Washington should cease getting a paycheck. And I'm not talking, okay, you suspend it, but then you get back. No fucking back pay. No, nothing. You can't come to an agreement on a balanced budget. You don't get paid.
Well,
and you leave the military veterans and all the Social Security and all this other shit alone.
I mean, TSA works for free in a government shutdown. Now, I'm not super trusting of those fuckers anyway. And now if they're working for free and no incentive, holy shit, that's the last line of defense between that metal tube I'm getting in and going down. But
it would make you happy to know the TSA inevitably, every time I go to the airport, pulls me out of line for a random check every fucking time.
Look, they shouldn't not only not get paid, they should have to pay back their salary for every day the government shut down. That would incentivize them to get things done.
Yes.
And I think that the economic policy in this country, again, we're just scratching the surface here, but I think we can all agree that trickle-down economics do not work. That when rich people get more money, they keep their money. They don't spend it on other people. But
maybe I want to push back on that one quick sec.
But I would say you're right. They stimulate. Then everybody goes spends that money, which drives up inflation, and then they have to raise interest rates to cool off inflation. So it's just this whole thing. And for the last, God, I would say 6 months, probably longer, all I've been hearing about economically is there's going to be this huge recession. Now, maybe there is, but it sure doesn't look that way, right? Travel is at an all-time high. People are buying shit like they have to spend the money or somebody's going to take it away from them. And yet, and we go full circle, right? The good news does not sell. So they have to impart this economic fear, this racial fear, this fear of the other, so people tune into the news to see what bad shit happened today.
Who are you supposed to be against today?
Right. Who am I supposed to hate today?
Exactly.
Right? Is it the white gun-toting truck driving guy, or is it the black gal down at the whatever corner market that is getting government assistance? Who do I hate? Who is taking shit from me today?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what it boils down to. Who's taking my shit?
Well, and the reality is none of the people you mentioned are taking your shit. You know who's taking your shit? The guy in the fucking white collared shirt wearing the red or blue tie in Washington. That's who's taking your shit. Mm-hmm. And that's what people need to realize.
Right.
Right there. Now, you mentioned something a minute ago, and I think we should wrap this up, but sure. I got to push back on one point you just mentioned. We could go fucking 2 hours. Right. You said trickle-down economics doesn't work. Now, I want to push back on that a little bit here.
Okay.
Because depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, your top echelon, multi-billion-dollar companies, right. Possibly.
Right.
Mainly because there's so many different tax loopholes that they can kind of manipulate and get around that you and I would never even know of.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Your local entrepreneur, right? The guy that that goes to your church that owns 5 Taco Bells or 5 chain restaurants or, doing very, very well for himself is not the problem.
Absolutely not.
And I want to clarify that though, because that's where people have this class warfare of,
right.
These rich people that live in this neighborhood over here that, I look at it and say your ethical entrepreneur right. is taking those tax breaks and those tax incentives right. and reinvesting back in his or her company.
Right.
It's the Jeff Bezoses of the world that say, fuck, I got this big tax break. I'm going to go fucking build a rocket and go orbit upper atmosphere and say I went to space. Same hypocritical, same people that want to argue about fucking climate change.
No, and I agree with that. I think, you know, you saw recently the auto worker strike.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact that General Motors and Ford over the past few years have reinvested into the company to drive up the stock price, to enrich the shareholders, while refusing to negotiate with the workers that put those vehicles on the road and get them to the dealers so that local dealership can, you know, have those cars, make money, all that stuff. But when they reinvest that, oh, and by the way, when CEOs are making 5,000 times what the average worker makes, no one who is in a corporate suite is worth $25-30 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue that, but I also can't defend it or agree with it wholeheartedly, because a lot of that compensation is based on percentages of sales and profits. Now, to your point, if your profits are high, well, that tells you got a disparity. The whole purpose of any company is to make a profit and to be successful. I get that.
Who are you doing that on the backs of?
Right. Here's the sad thing. Here's the real fucking sad thing about the auto worker strike that there's no solution to. These people are building an item that they will never themselves be able to afford.
Right, exactly.
Because by the time, and understand this, the profit margin is going to be the same. These companies, these gigantic companies, I'm not talking about the local business owner, entrepreneur, even the mid-level. The profit margins are going to be the same, and that's what they're looking at. So by the time they get their 4 fucking day work week, right? By the time they get their increase in pay, what do you think happens to the cost of that product they're building, especially in this case, an automobile?
Oh, it goes up.
Cost of the automobile goes up even higher than what it is. I can't believe how fucking expensive cars are these days. And so the average everyday American, the person building and putting their sweat and labor into building these vehicles, will never even be able to afford that vehicle that they're building.
Right.
Even with the employee discounts and all this other shit, because, well, we've got our profit margin and we have to do that. Now, when people say, well, you know, the CEOs or whatever make too much money, I always sit back and I look at that very cautiously to say, okay, what was the actual net profit of that company?
Right.
Or better yet, not net profit. What was the gross profit of that company before the executives got paid? And is their compensation tied to, you know, a certain percentage of that net profit? Right.
Right.
That's what you and I don't know.
Well, and that's fine. But are they uniquely gifted in any way other than any other person who went to business school or has practical experience? Are they bringing anything to the table? And I'll tell you right now, I don't have any problem with professional athletes making a shit ton of money, because there are things they do that no one else can do.
Yeah.
There are a limited number of Major League Baseball players. They should get well compensated. And the top of that class, the best basketball players in the world, football players, any professional athlete, anyone that is uniquely talented should make a lot of money and should be rewarded for their talent and the work they put into that. I just don't know that someone who is a CEO of a multinational, very profitable, very wealthy company deserves to be compensated at that level. Should there be a healthy compensation? Absolutely. But that seems obscene in a lot of ways.
It can be. Well, and I'll tell you, the federal government promotes that shit.
Absolutely.
And okay, let's go back in real quick. Let's go back to leading up to 2008. All the fucking golden parachutes that were handed out. And this was handed out, I would tell you, the housing collapse started at the very end of the Clinton administration, because there was this push through the Community Reinvestment Act to get people into homes. We got to get the underserved community into homes. So they forced the banks to create loan programs with good intentions originally. But the problem is you created loan programs that were not going to sustain responsible home ownership. Then during the Bush administration, it fucking exploded.
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then Obama comes in in 2008. This was just before he was elected, right? He gets handed this shit pile,
right,
effectively. And then what happens?
They give
Not
money.
only the housing collapses, the automobile industry collapses.
Yep.
So what does the government do?
Give them money.
The government goes in and bails out everybody.
Yep.
Automobiles, financial institutions, everyone. And then people say, well, that capitalism doesn't work. That is not capitalism.
No.
That is a cross between, I don't even know what you want to call it. I could argue and say it's almost fascism. When you have public-private partnerships, fascism or communism, when you have the government running private business.
Right. Yep.
And so to go back to your point, the government promotes this shit. And then you got Biden talking big and trying to talk big and tough, which it's really comical, I have to say, because he's fucking, come on, grandpa, eat your pudding, sit down. You're not big and tough. But he gets on TV, starts talking big and tough. He's the guy that's going to help the union worker. But yet, when you look at his voting record in the Senate, as well as VP, you instituted policy that allowed this to fucking happen.
And we're back to the beginning, right?
Yes.
Who has the money to drive the legislation?
Exactly.
It's not the workers.
It is not the everyday person. It's the fucking lobbyists. It's the massive corporation. It's whoever's got the money makes the rules. And I will tell you, for the people that are anti-capitalism, this is not capitalism.
No, it's not. And a topic for another day is just the money in politics. And you mentioned, and just to put a kind of bow on all of this, how do you run for office if you can't have lobbyists and you can't have those contributions from private companies and all of that? You have a publicly funded type of election. Everyone gets the same amount of money. And now you don't have just rich people running and people who can fund their own campaigns. You don't have just exclusively those people running at any level of office above city council person. Even then, you probably need to put money in. But
well, even then, city council people here in Westminster, Colorado, they fund their own campaign.
I mean, it turned into quite a show, right? We went from Bush Sr. to Clinton to Bush Jr. to potentially Clinton again to another Bush. I mean, we're not royalty. That's not how this country was. That's not how it's supposed to work.
Right.
Kids and brothers and grandkids of previous presidents
it's called a dictatorship.
Or
a monarch.
Neither which. I mean, I think we left. This country was founded on an anti-monarch.
Pretty much.
Ideal, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, hey, Dennis, I appreciate you coming in, man. I feel like you and I could probably do this maybe once a month. I don't know if you want to commit to that, but especially coming into next year, there's going to be no lack of shit to debate and to talk about.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to have you back. Yeah. Do you want to let people know where they can find you or follow you on? I mean, you're not real active on social media.
Not too active, but Brett mentioned I am a health insurance and Medicare broker, and you can find me at healthmarkets.com/DSmythe, DSMYTHE. I'm out and about a little bit. I'm on Facebook a little bit. So yeah.
Cool. Well, man, I appreciate you coming in. This was actually a good conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody listening or watching enjoyed it as well.
I do too.
And with that, everybody, as we ask on every episode, please share this, whatever platform you're on, Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever that is, YouTube now as well. Please rate us on whatever. And with that, everybody, thanks for listening and be defiant. See ya.